coming in. Welcome everybody to Canadian Council for the America fourth, I believe, public webinar that we've done this year already into February on the Nordic model as it would be applied or might be applied in Chile. We will get to the presentations in a minute and the conversation, but a few housekeeping rules as always. If you have a question, we will be taking written questions. And the question and answer box below, please use that box, not the chat box for the questions. Please make them brief. Please try and make them in the form of a question, and please make them not in the form of a diatribe, because it tends to be hard to filter through the diatribe to actually get what the question is. We'll do our best to integrate those questions into the conversation that we're having today. For those who are coming to the CCA event for the first time and you aren't aware of our website at ccacanada.com, please sign up to be on our mailing list. You can do so there and be apprised of all our upcoming public events. We also do a number of private events for our premium stakeholders. For those of you who are interested in premium membership, again, you can find more information on our website and or contact marta.blackwell@ccacanada.com. And I guess the other thing, couple things I should say, this of course is on the record, and a video is being made of this event and will be available on our website probably by the end of today. So those of you who want to review it again, or will be leaving early, or want to send it to friends and acquaintances who might be interested, please feel free to do so and to let them know. I think that's it for the preliminary housekeeping issues. Today's event is something that we've been wanting to have for some time, and the time is ripe to do it now with the inauguration of President-elect Boric less than a month away. And with the very clear indication coming from his economic team during the campaign and in transition that looking at the Nordic model is something that is very important and integral to the thinking of how the Boric administration wants to approach economic development and redevelopment and growth and social development and many other aspects to it in Chile. We are fortunate to have experts, three of only few experts on that with us today. We have Benedicte Bull, who's board president of the Nordic Institute of Latin American Studies. She's based at the University of Oslo in Norway. She's also the author of the seminal work, at least done by a Scandinavian academic or analyst, on applying the Nordic model to Latin America in a piece that she wrote, and I'm reading it here, Combating Inequality. Is there a Scandinavian way to reduce inequality in Latin America? Benedicte, thank you for being with us today. Also, we count again on a dear friend who's been with us before, Stephany Griffith-Jones, who's director of the Financial Markets Program Initiative for Policy Dialogue at Columbia University. She was also a senior advisor to the Boric campaign economic team during the campaign. And I dare say, Stephany, you seem to be the godmother of the entire Boric economic team that has gotten PhDs at the University of Cambridge or Cambridge University. I think that's fair, right? It's well, there's plenty of them there right now, and they came from somewhere. It's with some influence, some respected influence. And of course, we have Fernando Sossdorf, who's a research assistant, production, productivity, and management at UN ECLAC, based in Santiago. And he is the co-author of La Lección Nórdica, a book that came out only within the last several months to much acclaim. The book presentation was attended by actually wasn't even President-elect Boric at that time, just candidate Boric. So this is, again, another indication that this is a topic that's not just theoretical. It's very, very real and will become more real in the coming months. Fernando, as I say, was one of the three co-authors. One of the co-authors was recently named to to be the head of international economic relations, I guess treaties and the like, at the ministry. Jose Miguel Ahumada, and Fernando is one of the other co-authors. So without any more preliminary introductions, Fernando, maybe I'll ask you first, if you could just lay out the basic premise of what you're trying to do in the book, where Chile's economic situation over the last several decades, and why even consider a Nordic model.
Okay, thanks for the invitation. Let me, okay. Okay. Okay, so thanks. Okay, so let me initiate the discussion with the context and motivation of the book. So in the last 2 decades, Chile has had a solid economic growth, but on average. And there is a slowdown in performance over the last 2 decades. As you see, the economic growth went from 6.9, then 4%, 4%, and then 3% in the last decade. So there is an economic slowdown. Also, a common misbelief in all Latin American countries is that economic income inequality is falling, and that is not true. The truth for Chile, Argentina, Brazil, Mexico, and all the American countries, income inequality is not falling. If you use that record national account, you will see that income distribution is not falling. Besides, the income share of the top 1% is 26%. Along with Mexico and Brazil, this is huge. If you compare this figure with United States, France, Italy, is big. Also, inequality in access to quality of social safety net is, if you see education, health, and social service, this is a huge problem. In addition, due to the economic boom in 2003, Chile's main primary product are manufactured based on primary products like wine, copper, milk. So you have overexploitation, and also Chile is facing oil grade falling while energy consumption is rising. So in summary, Chile has accumulated a large social and environmental debt over the last decade, and also a poor economic performance. So this manifests itself in a social unrest in 2019, as you know. So a new constitution will be voted next year, and also a new lefty government will take office next month. So under this scenario, how to retake or rethink a new development strategy? So this was the idea of the book, and this is the book. If you speak Spanish, this is an amazing book, a new book. And this book has, I think, 4 main ideas or main questions. Can Chile learn from the development experience of other countries, or are the Chile's development challenge unique? What can we learn from the Nordic countries in terms of economic development strategy? And why Sweden, Finland, and Norway? Because these countries were for centuries a poor agrarian outpost. They are small in terms of population. they have natural resources like Chile, forests, sea. Also, what about the role of the state? And what about the structural transformation policy with equity and sustainability? Some answers to these main ideas, and I have 4 main answers. One is path dependency. And the potential for learning change across technology and sector. Some of them are more conducive to innovation and jumps in productivity than others. For instance, Sweden and Finland, for instance, moved to raw to pulp, from pulp to machinery. So you move along the value chain. You move to higher value-added products. Norway, for instance, moved from oil exploitation to engineering service. On the contrary, Chile moves from copper to copper. Chile doesn't move from copper, for instance, to machinery. Secondly, also in Latin America, there is a long discussion about if natural resources are as a blessing or a curse. I did my PhD in Italy, so I went to Sweden, Finland, and Norway. And this idea of natural resource curse is an idea of Argentinian economist called Previch. And when I talk with some Scandinavian economists, they know about Previch, and they told me, oh, it's a nice idea. But for us, natural resources are a blessing. According to the book, maybe the main point in natural resource is governance. When you have governance, and a good and excellent governance, you can generate economic linkage and also sustainable and inclusive development. Again, this is linked with the previous idea. And for instance, Chile has lithium, and there is an ongoing discussion about lithium. And the main producers in Latin America, Argentina, Bolivia, and Chile. This is the triangle of lithium. So what to do about lithium? Maybe we can manufacture electric cars. Maybe we can manufacture batteries. So you have to analyze the value chain again, and then you can move. But in order to move, you need industrial policy, you need education, you need training, you need a welfare state, so you need a long list of preconditions. Also, more state, but also more market. And why? Because you need a state as a catalyst for development to encourage creativity and foster entrepreneurship. For instance, Sweden in the 19th century, they did public procurement for innovation. They did public-private partnership. They did funding to entrepreneurs and innovators, such as Magnus Ericsson. So today, Latin America and also Chile are discussing about public procurement for innovation. And Sweden, Finland, and Norway did this 100 years ago. But also you need more market. Why? Because also you need more competition. But in order to have more competition, also you need more regulation. So you need more state. So it's a virtuous circle. And lastly, there is a neglected issue in economics, which is conflict. In the sense, the process of structural change entails winners and losses. For instance, moving this ongoing discussion, moving to zero carbon sector, for instance, will displace working in polluting industries. So you need, again, industrial policy, but also you need a strong welfare state. And again, Sweden, Finland, Norway did innovation industrial policy plus a strong welfare state. Given that they were able to move into knowledge-intensive sector without major effort on income distribution. So what is the exit? I think the exit is industrial policy, but a green industrial policy. Also, you need taxation in order to create a welfare state. Indeed, Latin America and Chile has an welfare state. Also, you need internalization of environmental externality. You need a new welfare state. Lastly, you need a new regional integration and a new renewed multilateralism. Lastly, let me show you, this is a map of the main industrial countries around the world. As you see, all the countries are moving to amazing industrial plan. UK, Canada, USA, Sweden. But in Latin America, you see nothing. Chile has not a long industrial plan. Argentina has no long industrial plan. So maybe now it's time to, for instance, think about Chile 2050, Chile 2000, I don't know, 100. Maybe this is the time to think to over the long run and to create a green industrial policy. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Fernando. That's a great way to begin this. Stephany, may I turn to you now just for your opening comments on what Fernando had said and other comments that you have about the application of the Nordic model.
Thank you very much, Ken, and thank you so much for the invitation to this important seminar. I had actually, and this is a bit anecdotal, but I had the privilege of launching this book before, this excellent book. And the other panelist was then presidential candidate Boric. And I can tell you that from his presentation, which was excellent, he had read every footnote of the book. So it's being taken very seriously, both the book and the model. Looking at it from a sort of broad perspective, Chile and of course globally faces a number of great challenges as well as opportunities. And we have first the climate crisis, the climate emergency, and the need to radically transform economies to green transition path, which is, I think, a very high priority of the elected government. Secondly, as Fernando pointed out so clearly, in Chile and in general Latin America, we have very bad income distribution, which is a major contributory factor to social unrest. And I think hopefully the fact that this new government will be so strongly committed to improving income distribution and social services to the poor should therefore help provide more social peace and stability, which is of course good for the population, and but also even good for business, and because it provides greater stability. And this is a theme I want to develop a little bit. This is, I think, both the Nordic strategy and the Chilean strategy that is being developed has a bigger role for the state, but also, as Fernando put it very nicely, a bigger role for the market in a number of areas. So, for example, just having green investment generates new opportunities, including in developing local and international capital markets, and it generates a major, not just in financial markets, but major investment opportunities for domestic and foreign investors. So it is not a question of state versus private versus market, which I think is a rather old-fashioned concept, but how they can best collaborate. And I think here we have very interesting experiences from this model. And also, of course, we still have the challenge of COVID, because that affects the short-term macroeconomic situation of the country as worldwide. And sadly, I'm a bit of an example of that because I'm with COVID, but getting better now. So what is the, there are some short-term difficulties, if I may mention, Chile as worldwide, because there's a difficult macroeconomic situation. Because after a period of very slow growth, as Fernando pointed out, Chile its economy became very overheated last year. And this year will have to require some slowing down of this because public spending had increased by 30% and it will be lowered dramatically. Inflation is also quite high. But I think what is very important in the case of this government is that, like Scandinavian countries, this is a government which is very strongly committed to macroeconomic stability, because this is I see it as a precondition for carrying out successful structural reforms that this government so rightly wants to do. So we have I think the first year may be more difficult, but I want to stress the positive aspects that Chile has, particularly in this moment. One is there is a new government with very strong support electorally. We got the largest majority in history. It's very deeply committed to social justice and to a new pattern of development and of growth, which I think is sort of consistent with international best practice, emphasis on green transition and on greater equality. But as I mentioned, it also has a strong commitment with maintaining macroeconomic equilibria and fiscal sustainability. So this is a difficult equation to keep, but I think the principles are very clearly outlined. And in that, I think the Nordic model also gives us a very important lesson. It's interesting that issues like inflation, exchange rate instability, till in the initial phases of the Nordic model never appeared because they managed their macroeconomy so well. I would like to also emphasize that Chile has, as Fernando also mentioned, fantastic resources. Lithium, perhaps the world's largest reserves, the possibility of producing green hydrogen, given fantastic opportunities in solar and wind, and copper, which can also, and this also responds to this idea of having more value added. There are studies and developments around green copper. So it's not just what you export, how much aggregate value, but how much the methods you pursue are greener. And I think Chile is very lucky because the world needs all these materials. The production of cars is much more intensive than electric cars, is much more intensive in copper, in lithium, of course, than traditional cars. And I think it's important to have a long-term strategy, but there is also a window of opportunity because now the car stock in the world is going to be converted very quickly into electric cars the next 10, 15 years. And if Chile is there, not only selling lithium, but also participating in the production of batteries and possibly, if associated, I think, with international companies in the production of cars, electric cars, this could be a valuable opportunity, but it's a limited in time opportunity. And in the same way, green hydrogen is a major opportunity because Chile is so blessed with fantastic solar and wind resources. And I think that as the book points out, there is a need for a key role for the state to direct this process, to invest in this process, but always collaborating with the private sector, both in the definition of the priorities, but also in the implementation. And I can give one example, which is the case that I have studied of development banks. Development banks are publicly owned, but funding, often they can fund themselves in the private market, and they lend to the private sector. So it is exactly this kind of best collaboration between public and private sector, which hopefully will be improved. Chile has development banks, but they're very small and they have somewhat limited instruments, so they can be developed further. I agree totally about this idea about turning the resource curse into a resource blessing. And I heard about this idea for the first time actually in Africa, where a colleague told me, how can we do this? And I think this is about adding value, adding knowledge, and of course, the importance of research and development. As the book very clearly points out, Chile has less than 0.4% of GDP in innovation investment, which is one of the lowest is the lowest in the OECD, much lower than what it was in the Scandinavian countries when they had similar level of development of Chile. And it's interesting that the Boric program has a commitment to increase that to 1% of GDP. And more broadly, in increasing the role of the state, but in promoting also private investment. And here I would just like to stress that the conservative economists talk about crowding out by the state. They think that if the state invests more, it will mean that the private sector will be able and have less space to invest. But I think that particularly in these moments when we need such a major structural transformation, when there is a lot of uncertainty involved in that, but also in the long term, it is very key that the state provides elements like good infrastructure, good education, training of skills, and investment in areas which are uncertain to provide showcasing to the private sector, so that they will lead to more crowding in. So I think there's a state which I think the Boric program, consistent with a lot of the leading intellectual academic thinking now, is a catalyzer of private investment, is a collaborator to turn this economy to be much more knowledge intensive and fairer and much greener. And I think for this, it's very valuable to look at the Scandinavian model. I should just finish maybe by saying, not just the Scandinavian model, but other successful experiences like the East Asian model. So we talk now about the entrepreneurial state, but in the past, we've also learned much from the East Asian model and what was then called the development state. Again, a similar context, the state putting the preconditions for development. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Stephany. Benedicte, first of all, thank you for putting that backdrop. We're all envious of the backdrop you put behind you. And you could have put the screen by Edvard Munch, and you didn't. So thank you very much for that as well. But you listened to esteemed Chileans talk about how they think a model that partly comes from your country and a couple other countries. What's your view of it, sitting where you are?
It's been really interesting to listen to, and thank you first of all for the invitation. I would also like to thank Fernando for an excellent book. It felt a bit strange to read about my own country and my neighboring countries in Spanish, and learning a lot. So congratulations. I think that people here in Norway are really excited that Chile looks to Norway, because we look a lot to Chile these days for some answers. And I would like to get back to that towards the end. But I would just like to maybe bring in a little bit of the kind of social foundations of the Nordic model. And I think that's really important. And that's maybe why I have such faith in Chile. Being completely aware of all the difficulties that Stephany mentioned and that you're all aware of. But I would like to maybe start by saying that I think it's important to remember that the Nordic model is not a model that the Nordic countries chose to apply. It is one that evolved very gradually. And it was from failing and correcting things. And it was always a result of pressures from below. I think it's impossible to understand how this evolves without understanding, taking the social movement of the late 19th century, early 20th century as a starting point, and how they demanded some concessions from the state, and how they entered into negotiations with the state, eventually to partly over the state, but also with the private sector, and the evolution of the tripartite model for negotiating not only wages, but basically everything in society. It was mentioned that more or less state is a kind of old-fashioned debate, and I completely agree about that. And I think maybe what you find in the Nordic countries is a lack of fear of bringing the state in. In some countries in Latin America, you're immediately kind of accused of wanting a communist or socialist, some radical socialist model when you discuss that. But I also think it's important to think of the Nordic model as being kind of basically based on the market, but having three different kind of clusters of state activity and policy making that are very much coordinated between each other. And one is the macroeconomic and industrial policy, then it's the wage coordination and the collective bargaining system that is key to understanding the evolution of reduction of inequality, increasing the last year. So, I mean, bear in mind, I think it's important not to idealize also the Nordic model, because there's definitely problems. And the third, of course, is the welfare state, the public education system, the public health system, and that enables a very high level of work participation of the whole population, including women, and how these are kind of adjusted to fit each other in that what has become some different Nordic models. Of course, I know the Norwegian one better than the others, but the principle of negotiated solutions between at least three groups of actors is, I think it's key to understand the evolution of it. And the way I see this, some of the major mechanisms I think are important to understand. And one is that the reduction of inequality. I think that has been a key both for the political and the economic sustainability of this model. How that is based on collective wage bargaining that actually creates a system where high-end wages are relatively low and low-end wages are relatively high, which it provides an incentive for innovation in the system, because it's really expensive to hire kind of the low-end groups of workers. And it provides for a kind of economic dynamic that avoids the trap of a policy that seeks to reduce inequality, but that also reduces economic growth over the long term. And the other part of this, I think, is also important to remember is the kind of the political reinforcement in this model, that it is a form of distribution that reduces inequality, but that essentially is assumed to benefit the whole population and not just the poorest. Also, broad levels of middle classes, and that enables a system that basically everybody, to some extent, supports. Of course, there's political differences, but you will be, there's only very marginal groups in the Norwegian society that actually do not want us to keep on funding the welfare state. It has a very, very broad political support in the Nordic countries. And just a little anecdote, I was discussing education policies with a Chilean former ambassador in a seminar, and I had made this interesting calculation of higher education in Chile and Norway, figuring out that the private universities in Norway have approximately the same amount of public funding as the public universities in Chile. And we discussed the importance of public funding of education, and we were all really, we agreed about just about everything until the issue of funding basic education for everybody came up. And he said, well, I'm not gonna fund the education for the rich, the children of the rich people in Chile. And this is the kind of the attitude that's very different after so many years of a policy, a public policy of distribution that has sought to actually benefit everybody. I think that this model, that the kind of Nordic model, it has also survived a lot of crises, and I think that is important to point out. I do think it has some major challenges, at least in Norway, faced with the green transition that we all have, climate change, and the policies to reduce climate emissions that we have to take on. And the challenge I see is that our model is based on a kind of a coalition, a social democratic coalition where everybody gains, but it's based on economic growth. And over the last 20 years, it's been increasingly based, of course, on income from the oil sector. Now we have the oil fund that invests in a lot of other things, but still that is the major, it's a fundamental part of the economy. And how to recreate a new coalition that includes also other movements, and not essentially the labor movement, the private sector and the state, in a different kind of joint policy that can bring Norway and other resource-dependent countries into a new age. I think that is a huge challenge. And that is where I think that Chile has a lot to say for, because the new government is not based on a very narrow movement, it's based on very broad social groups, including environmental movements and many others. And I think it is of course a huge challenge, but it's also one that can kind of show the way for also maybe other countries, if you succeed, on how to involve all of these broad groups into a new kind of consensus model. I think I'll stop there and be very excited to discuss this further with you.
Thank you, Benedicte. My only regret is that we didn't program this for 5 hours. This is where there's a lot being said and a lot of great stuff. We have 2 questions that we received already, and from Jonathan and Barbara, we will get to those. I will definitely keep my question to the side for the moment, but I want to keep going around. Fernando, you heard what Stephany and Benedicte said. Did you want to respond to any of those or the comments that they made?
I totally agree with Stephany and Benedicte in the sense it's not only move along the value chain. It's not only move, for instance, move from copper to or lithium to manufacture electric cars. Also, you can move to new methods. For instance, green copper, new techniques. I totally agree with Stephany. And also the point of Benedict, maybe Chile can be the pioneer, not only in Latin America, also in the world about green economy. There is a huge potential for Chile, also for Latin American countries to develop a green economy. In my opinion, the time is now. It's time to establish a new social contract, a new Green Deal. Meanwhile, Europe is moving to a new deal, a green deal. Latin America is moving to a polluting deal. So maybe it's time to move to a new contract. Maybe it's time to improve income distribution. And I totally agree with Benedict. Maybe it's time to build a welfare state, but which include all the population, not only the poor people or target. For instance, the 10% of the population, the 20% is all the population. Maybe a huge key point in the Nordic model is that you have a welfare state, but includes all the population. So you create a network. So you create a economic security. Chile, like the rest of the Latin American country, you have a economic insecurity. For instance, in Chile, if you fell ill, you went to the hospital, maybe you go from the top 90% from the top 10%. You have vulnerability in Chile. And why? Because you don't have a welfare state.
Thank you, Fernando. Stephany, another round of comments if you have it. I guess one of the questions I have, Stephany, is, the thought in a number of countries in Latin America is you talk about building a welfare state and it immediately sends shudders down people's spine that, oh my God, here we go again. And the quote, inefficiencies and the quote, corruptions and et cetera, et cetera. How do you respond to those concerns that some people might voice?
Yeah, if I may also more broadly follow the line that Fernando had, and I'll come back to the welfare state in your interesting question. So I think, and also I peeked, although I'm jumping ahead, at Barbara Stalling's question, very interesting question. Hi, Barbara.
Yeah, we're going to get to it, but feel free to jump in and answer now. We're going to get to that, absolutely.
So she stresses very interestingly the problems of the neighborhood. I think that the neighborhood is in many ways shifting to a more a progressive left.
Stephany, if I can for a second, since you're going to get to, let me ask the question so people know what you're responding to and you can weave that in. This is a question from Barbara Stallings, esteemed economist at Brown University. Thank you for joining us, Barbara. Her question is, how important is the neighborhood in following a Nordic model? The Nordic countries have support from each other and from Europe. Chile's neighborhood is less supportive. Is that a problem? If so, how can it be dealt with? Okay, thanks, Stephany. Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you very much, and thank Ken and Barbara. So I think that the neighborhood hopefully may be improving. I think particularly if Lula is elected in Brazil being the largest economy in Latin America, and Lula representing, progressive but a balanced left, which could maybe shape the discussion in the continent. But I think what is positive is the international movement. And I would talk here both about the Europe and the United States, because Fernando was talking about the Green New Deal, for example, which is so prevalent and dominant in European thinking, and I think is increasingly influential under the Biden administration, though he hasn't unfortunately been able to get all this through Congress. But there is this shift internationally, I think, towards, and of course, the events at the COP in Glasgow and hopefully in Egypt are moving things towards a greater commitment to green investment, which, as I said, indirectly favors Chile via demand, but also more broadly in terms of the model that is being pursued. And particularly within the EU, for example, there is a very strong commitment to the Green New Deal and a lot of resources given to it. The recovery plan, the 650 billion 750 billion euros recovery plan has a very strong redistributive and green component. And similarly, for example, the European Investment Bank, 50% of its loans in a few years will have to go to the green transition. So we have, I think, an alignment of the stars, if you like, between the kind of policies that the Boric administration is pursuing and the international consensus. And I should finish saying that in Europe, the largest economy and the strongest economy is, of course, Germany. And we've just had a social democrat-led government with the Greens in the coalition, and interestingly, a conservative party, a free market party, but dominated by the Social Democrats, taking the role. And they, again, are very close in their thinking and the model that President-elect Boric will be encouraging. So I think that the stars are aligned perhaps more internationally than regionally, but I think there is a hope. And on the welfare state, I'm so glad that Benedicte mentioned it so much. I think it's very important that one moves towards a welfare state that is widely seen, as in the Scandinavian countries, to be effective for all people, particularly for the poorer members, but also for all people. And when I visited Scandinavia, people tell you these examples. My child is sick, but I can continue working because somebody comes to the house. And I think that there is a lot of emphasis in the Boric program on these issues of transparency, limiting corruption, and so on, which are, I think, a very important accompaniment. But I think, the numbers that Fernando gave and that we all know are very clear that you need an improvement, not only of better pensions and salaries, but of a welfare state which has better education and health for all. And as I said in my initial ideas, I think this is also good for the private sector, because I think there is so much empirical evidence that a well-educated and healthy population will be a much more efficient and productive labor force. So even from the point of view of self-interest, I think, of the private sector, a welfare state is a key precondition, which I think is so widely recognized in Scandinavia. So it's fantastic to have this seminar and hear more about this Scandinavian experience.
Thank you, Stephany. Benedicte, I think you had, I was coming to you, but it looked like you may have put your hand up at one point, but please, another round of thoughts based on what you've heard, if you want to jump in.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on the outlook for sort of the international context being very favorable in terms of the green transition and new investments in renewables. I see that is also going to be a major challenge for the new government because of all the what you call green to green conflicts that it may generate, because there is also a need to invest in natural resources that may also be scarce, and the conflicts between lithium production and water scarcity, and there are such a number of them, and there are very strong expressions within the, as far as I know of it, within the kind of the coalition upon which the new government is based, about how to solve those conflicts and those major issues, because we don't only have a climate crisis, but also a biodiversity crisis. But I think that there is a great scope for actually exchanging international experiences on that. Many countries have also good experiences. There are some good experiences from the Arctic, where this photo on the back here is from, where we have our own indigenous groups and conflicts over natural resources that are just coming, that are getting stronger and stronger with the green shift. So there are new possibilities, but also new challenges, I think, in that respect.
Thank you, Benedicte. The questions keep mounting from the audience, and I'm going to get to them right after this. Oh, Fernando, please jump in.
No,
yes.
Just briefly, can I answer to Barbara? Because it's
Whatever,
important.
yeah, please.
No, I totally agree with Barbara in the sense you need integration. Latin America needs a new integration. Mm-hmm. For instance, in this moment, Latin American countries are discussing to create a regional market to manufacture pharmaceutical products and medical devices. Also, in the case of lithium, in Latin America, there is a triangle between, because you have Argentina, Bolivia, and Chile. And maybe you need, again, a regional market for electromobility. So electromobility, for instance, is the key of the future. Such as Stephany pointed out, okay, so you need electric cars, you need battery, so maybe you need, again, a Latin America market integration. And then you can move from, I don't know, extract lithium to batteries and maybe manufacture electric cars. But it's key to have a regional integration.
Right, okay, thank you. Quick question. I think Fernando and all the panelists in one way or another have said that the time is now to try and implement these ideas and go forward. At the same time, Stephany, you, at least you, I remember, alluded to the fact that, you know, economic times are a little bit tough coming out of COVID and rebuilding. So the question is, can all of this be is there a inflated price tag or cost to get from where Chile is now to develop or move towards the model that you are advocating for, or all of you are advocating in one way or another? Does Chile have the resources and the money, to be quite blunt, to start moving in that direction? And or maybe is it a net gain for Chile in terms of what its financial outlay would be to get there? Stephany, do you want to take that first?
Okay. I think that's an excellent question. I mean, the Boric program proposes to increase tax by 5% of GDP by the end of the 4 years. Of course, a problem is that they will not have a clear majority in the Congress, so it will require a number of negotiations, both with the center-left, which are very supportive of the government, but also with some elements of the center-right. I feel very confident in the sense that President-elect Boric has, I think, great political skills, which he has shown in a number of moments, as former President Lagos pointed out, and that will be very helpful. And there is also this economic team led by Finance Minister Marcel, which is extremely well prepared. Mario Marcel, for example, is the former governor of the central bank, so he has an incredibly good knowledge of the Chilean economy, very accomplished economists. But all the economic team, I think, including one of the co-authors of this book, Jose Miguel Ahumada, who, as you, I think, pointed out, is going to be heading the department. He's going to be Deputy Minister for International Economic Relations at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So he will be involved in this as well. So I think there is this need for increased taxation, which hopefully will be achieved. Not this year, because this year's budget has already been committed. And I think that's another sign of macro stability, that President Boric has accepted the budget that was approved last year, which is tight, but there is this proposal of increasing taxation. And I think the other thing is that, of course, Chile cannot do it alone. And I think there is a lot of interest in, hopefully, in attracting international funds, both public and private, both from international institutions like the Inter-American Development Bank, the World Bank, the European Investment Bank, but also very much from the private investors who would come, I think, precisely because the opportunities are so good. So it would be a combination, and of course the Chilean private sector, which would also join. So I think, yes, more resources are needed, but I think it is feasible to do this, both on the increased investment fund side to have this new model, and on increasing welfare and social spending.
Thank you, Stephany. Okay, I will, Fernando or Benedicte, unless you want to jump in here, I'll go to the questions. Did you want to jump in quickly, or should I go to the audience questions? Fernando, Benedicte, go straight ahead. Okay, we have a lot of them, and I'm trying to group them in certain themes, not always as simple. But you know, one of them, you know, there's a theme that runs through a couple of them, and that is about, I suppose, term that we would use, social consciousness or social conscience of Chileans. And there's one particularly from a journalist about a feeling of superiority that comes from inequality amongst the elite, the economic elite in Chile. And I guess the question that's being posed is, how do you get the elite, the Chilean elite, particularly those who may feel that their privileges may be infringed by the model that's being proposed? How do you get them to go along with this if that's necessary? And the corollary question, I guess, for Benedicte is, what is that sense of common weal amongst Scandinavians that allows this system to work in those societies, albeit you did mention earlier that there's some resistance about who should be paying for whose education and the like. Open, broad question. Fernando, will there be some losers in the elite in Chile who resist this because they feel that this new model will necessarily mean that they will lose?
Indeed. So Latin America and also Chile has this traditional debate about elites concentration and this lock-in of the starter production, in the sense, okay, so the elite, the top 1% concentrate a big portion of the Chilean income. So what to do? Maybe a solution is, okay, establish a new social contract, a new social pact. So like the Nordic model, okay, so for instance, the elite, okay, I will tax you, I will put a huge tax, but in return you will have a free economic freedom. You can establish, for instance, entrepreneurship. So it's a game, but it's not a zero game. It's not a zero game game in the sense. So, in my opinion, okay, you have to put tax, but also you have to return some condition.
Benedicte, this plays right into you. How is it in outside of Scandinavia? Do we overemphasize, or do we have a misconception of a social pact amongst all classes, as it were, is to the importance of certain fundamental bottom lines of welfare for the society as a whole? Can you help us?
Well, this is something I've been thinking a lot about, because my actual main field of research in Latin America has been elites, and to understand why did the Scandinavian elites actually accept loss of privilege to a large extent, but not now, but some decades ago. Kind of the sad and difficult answer to that is the Second World War. That came right after sort of the major social unrest and a new agreement, and they had to accept the model was changed. So that is the sort of a historical answer, but I kind of the more long-term process depended on negotiations and the strength of the labor movement, the strength of the social movements and their demands, and the ability of the state to mediate between their demands and the elites and the private sector. And it has become a model that large parts of the elites have understood that it's to their benefit. Stephany mentioned some of the issues of an educated population. It's also about economic stability and the possibility to plan ahead because you have agreements and you have a low level of conflictivity that is absolutely to the benefit of the private sector. Now, of course, it's always much more difficult to change the system. And I think a major difference between the Scandinavian countries and all the Latin American countries is the level of unionization, which is very low in all Latin American countries. But I think that social organization from below is still a prerequisite, and the mediation by the state and a kind of a commitment to dialogue and to the implementation of agreements that have been reached over the long term. And I think, I mean, one way is to simply start to change the discourse. We have a famous economist in Norway that used to say that we can't afford to have that many rich people. People are always asking sort of, can we afford to support the poor? But he says we can't afford to support so many rich people, and to try to start to change the discourse, I think is important. Now, in all the Scandinavian countries, inequality has increased over the last years, and what's particularly worrying is that the number of super rich people have increased. And that is not necessarily a broad economic problem, but it can very quickly be a political problem. And I think that is what in Latin America, you both have a very skewed income distribution and a group of really super rich that really don't feel they are untouchable by politics. So of course it's a long route, but I think that the signs that have come out of the current the new Chilean government now of insisting on dialogue is really the avenue. And I think there are some signals also among the global super elite that this increased income distribution just cannot continue, and it will be to the benefit to everybody to change it. Not easy, not a quick fix, but it is a really important issue to tackle.
Thank you, Benedicte. Stephany, did you want to jump in on that, or should I keep going with the questions?
Well, just one brief point, just maybe to mention that when recovery in the US was slowing down in the 30s, Keynes wrote, the great economist Keynes wrote a letter to Roosevelt, and he suggested two things to give further strength to the recovery. The first one was to increase bargaining power of workers. This goes very well with Benedicte's point. The second was to increase public investment. So I think this is a very important area. I mean, to increase bargaining power of workers. The workers used to be very powerful in Chile, but of course they were very weakened during the dictatorship. And I think that is a very valuable path, which I think this new government will pursue. And I also want to reaffirm the point that Benedicte made so well about the importance of a society and a government that is perceived to be in favor of greater social justice for political and social stability. So that is, again, this nexus which should favor the acceptance by more conservative forces, by the private sector, of a government that is more progressive and that pushes this element because it's actually in their long-term and short-term interest.
Thank you, Stephany. Fernando, did you want to say something to this point? You're on mute, Fernando, if you did. Okay. Nothing. Okay, I'll keep going on. I know I'm well aware that we're over time. We will try and close this up shortly. I appreciate everybody's forbearance. It's really hard to bring this to a close because it's so interesting. But obviously, we need to do more. And this is part of a continuum of a theme that we've been the Canadian Council have been looking at closely for the last couple of years, and will continue to do so. This is not the last of this kind of conversation we'll have. Anne Sorensen, the distinguished columnist from Politiken in Denmark, based in Chile, asked a question about strong unions again, and I believe that's been answered a couple of times by the panelists. So I will go on that. There is a question here about informality. If I scroll, if I can find it, if it's still here. It seems to have gone by the wayside. Okay, I mean, there's just, well, there are a couple of comments here. There's a previous question that seems to have dropped about the high rate of informality in Chile, as obviously, you know, throughout Latin America. And perhaps maybe the panelists could address how the high rate of informality affects or needs to be accounted for or will be incorporated into the formal economy through the adaptation or the movement towards a Nordic model. So, Fernando, how might what you're proposing and talking about help resolve the issue of informalidad in the Chilean economy?
Okay, it's a tough question in the sense half of the labor force in Latin America works in the informal sector. So half. In Chile, it's close to 25%. So it's complicated because on one side, you need to tax the formal sector, but the formal sector is small. In addition, Stephany pointed out the issue about wage and productivity. In Latin America and also in Chile, wage is growing below the productivity growth. So productivity growth is going to improve capital share. So Chile faces a complex mission, move people from informal to formal sector, and also increase the power of syndicate. So maybe you need policy to minimize the informal sector. So you need to move people from informal to formal, and also you need to increase the power of the worker. And maybe you need to do a collectivity bargain, maybe at industrial level, maybe a national level. I don't know. This is an ongoing discussion in Latin America.
Thank you, Fernando. Stephany, you have any thoughts about that? You're on mute, Stephany. Yeah, okay.
I'm a little bit running out of voice, so I might.
Okay. Well, this is the last question. This is the last. We're going to close in a second. So we'd squeeze out a couple of comments about how this model may help ameliorate the concerns and the problems of such a large informal sector. Is there a relationship between this model and helping to move to more formality?
I think, for example, in the Boric program, and particularly in the last proposals, there is a very strong support for SMEs, particularly strong support for SMEs. And of course, SMEs are known to absorb very high proportions of national employment. So I think that would be a good way to start on that. And also, of course, I think increasing benefits across the range in things like health and education and possibly minimum income will of course reach everybody, both informal and informal. But in the long term, I think the best solution is, of course, to help incorporate informal people into the formal economy.
Thank you, Stephany. Benedicte, do you have any thoughts about that?
No, I think it is extremely complex, and it's hard to have some very easy answers to that. And I know there's a lot of things have been tried. The only thing I would like to mention is that historical research points to that there was actually a very high informal sector in the Scandinavian or the Nordic countries as well, before the welfare state was implemented. So it didn't really start from high levels of formal workers. There were some, of course, and of course. The problem is where to start, because you need first to get them incorporated in order to tax them, in order to provide benefits. But it is also clear that the provision of benefits has been an incentive for the small businesses to formalize. So it is a very difficult process, but providing the right incentives, I think it's also not impossible to ensure. And what I think also that it is important not to associate a low level of unionization simply with a high level of informal workers. Of course, they're related, but you also see examples of organization of informal workers that can have a political impact. So really a complex issue, but important.
Thank you, Benedicte. Thank you to all three of you. I've stretched and pulled and cajoled as much out as I can with going 15 minutes over. We try to stay on the hour, as I mentioned earlier, but some topics just admit of much longer conversations. This is clearly one of them. This is, as I mentioned before, a second installment of these kinds of conversations. Stephany, you were with us when we had one not too many months ago related to this and new economic models coming out of COVID, or what was being classified as coming out of COVID. We will continue to do this. Thank you, all three panelists. We will be calling on you again. This is the conversation that needs to be had and ongoing, and some of the issues we pose, and we know there'll be new thinking about what's going on in the laboratory that's Chile right now on these matters. And Benedicte, the perspective that you could provide on Scandinavia was outstanding. Was really helped put some of this in perspective. Really important historical perspective, and it is all about context, isn't it? In the end of the day. So thank you, all of you. Thank you for the folks who stayed with us. I see most people did stay with us. The video will be available on our website later today, we would hope. And please stay tuned for further events. We will be announcing shortly the 13th in our series of Finding the Colombian Center, with the lead up to the congressional elections and the consultas of the coalition parties on March 13th, headed into the first round at the end of May. If you missed the last one, the video has also already been posted. It's with next generation politicians in Chile and their views about next gen politics and priorities. With that, again, thank you, everybody. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.